All right, so my name is Mark Scott. I'm the Youth Programs Director at Lamoille Restorative Center, which is in Hyde Park, Vermont. We're a little nonprofit, and we have restorative justice programs that run the spectrum from prevention work to post-incarceration work. So from school engagement to COSAs, which are circles of support and accountability. And my specific role there in the restorative justice world is doing systems work with schools on implementing restorative practices school-wide.
Yep. And I'm Michael Malik. I work for the St. Johnsbury Justice Center. I work actually I live in Greensboro Bend. I work out of my home remotely. I do restorative panels only for the Justice Center and here in the greater Hardwick area. And we run the gamut. We take referrals from probation officers and the courts, and we have a pre-charge program with the police that works pretty well. And we can even do citizen referrals if need be. And so we're staying active with that, and that's pretty much what I do. I do coordinate the volunteers and do all the legwork to make panels happen. At least once a month, there's a couple people that go through our panel process.
Cool. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the restorative justice principles in schools a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about how your principles show up in the community.
Yeah.
Kind of go back and forth like that. So when we talk about restorative practices in schools work, it's based on the same foundation as the community work, but we have a very intentional focus on building community first. And we look at working in schools to help young people develop community building skills, relationship skills, and conflict resolution skills. And we do that through a 3-tiered system. One, doing a lot of setting values and goals for a school and community building, and then working with individuals on how to do restorative problem solving, and then moving up to this idea that if there's an incident where young people are excluded from the community, they're suspended or removed, there's a process to welcome them back in so that they can be felt like they're part of the community again. And so a lot of the work that we do in schools is built off the kind of the community-based model that started, with Howard Zare and Kate Pranitz and some other people who really led the way to think about circles in the community and in the school. And what I think was really interesting is how the school is it's a full-blown smaller community, a confined community where you really have to be thoughtful about how everybody interacts with each other, because these people, the young people, if something happens, they come back to that same community over and over and over again, day after day. So thinking about how do we help them navigate their own relationships and their own differences.
Yeah, that's somewhat different. I think one of our goals at restorative justice in the field, if you will, is, to recreate some kind of community with the client and the volunteers and any other interested parties. So that's interesting. So neither technique is simpler or harder to do. It's just that we are. I think the restorative justice out in the public developing community with somebody that's offended somebody else is somewhat of a new way of looking at things, perhaps, and makes it a challenge, but a worthy challenge. But you've got your captive audience, so that's that's kind of nice. Yeah, and so they know that they're going to see these people.
Yeah.
Of course, we're in a small community, so that's how I noticed that's helpful.
Yeah.
To me, having a smaller community. I come from a bigger base in southern Vermont, so I find that easier.
Yeah. And when you think about restorative justice application, there's often this Venn diagram that I think is in Howard Zer's book a lot that says the three circles, one being the victims, one being the offender, one being the community. And when there's three circles intertwine, and that middle place of that Venn diagram is where the needs of all three of those populations come together. And I think that's really important for both. And just who represents the community. In a school, it's fairly, it's a little bit, because the school, if it's a classroom, the classroom obvious. Can be that community. Yeah. And when you're working out in the greater population, identifying that community can sometimes be a little bit harder to do. And it's often where our volunteers, community volunteers, come into play.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe one of the things that I kind of wonder about when we do work in schools, it's a lot about who's impacted, how are they impacted, and what needs to be done to make things right, those kind of guiding questions of restorative practices. How do maybe, Mike, what does it look like when you're doing that kind of work in the community? How do those questions come up, or how do you navigate that?
Well, they come up, and it's so there's such a variety of referrals, and the age is so different, and so we'll have some people that are would identify as victims themselves, quite often, had very hard upbringings, and so the volunteers are essential to our practice, of course, because we have typically 4 volunteers meet at the panel. Myself would be 5, and our victim advocate, we have a full-time victim advocate is 6. So first we have to establish some community with the person that offended. Has to grasp the idea of talking to 5 or 6 people about their story that they haven't met before. So that's the person that offended has met me. I've done an intake and met them privately.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how you build the community, and in the community-based restorative justice, it's challenging because you have a short period of time.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a big difference between school work and community work. Yeah. School work, as we said earlier, kids are usually with each other and teachers are with each other every day. And in the community work, you have this short period of time to build trust and rapport.
Right. So I mean, from my standpoint, it would be pretty ideal to have myself and my volunteers doing other things with this person. That would be great.
Yeah.
Because relationships develop if you will, a metaphor of a plant. They want to take root. I think because I think we're all based in we all need people.
Yeah.
And we have to. So we have to re-educate some people and get them to realize, none of us got to where we got today by ourselves,
Yeah.
It took a joint effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think restorative justice in schools is a great evolution, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how you said that because when we think about key principles of restorative justice, really relationships are first.
Yeah.
And it goes back to like those three questions, right?
Yeah, and you want to create an environment. We have to work a little differently too to create an environment so that because we're also fighting some history of threatening incarceration over a lot of our people. So that's another thing that I always have in the back of my mind, because I was a probation officer at one time. I couldn't continue doing the job. I did it for about 9 years, but it helped shape me drastically on how I relate to to how insecure people feel when they come walking in.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, which is school is great. These students are, try to come daily to your establishment, whereas we're strangers to these people.
Yeah, big difference there.
So,
So what you just said, Mike, makes me just wonder, like when I went to school, no mention or thought of anything like this.
Yeah.
Let alone the words, not even the theory or the principles. So my question is, whether we're talking about schools or outside of schools, when you talked about the community, the offender, and the victim, what's the incentive or the benefits for all three of those versus the alternative? Like, why do this at all? What was happening that wasn't working, or why is this better?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So, for the street approach to restorative justice, there may be several different answers to that question. Number one is they may be on they may have a probation order. They may be on probation, thus they have a probation order, and it has a condition that you'll complete the restorative justice panel. So that's a direct, you shall do this.
Gotcha.
And that makes it. I have to work harder, I think, emotionally anyway, to work that. But then we also have which is working quite well, is we in this police department I'm given a lot of referrals, and I feel for the first time in a lot of years I feel valued in a way that I didn't used to. So, but anyway, so the police will give us a pre-charge, and the person may have got a citation for court. So that's what might make them motivated to do it. If you don't do the pre-charge, you're going to have to report to court on the cite date.
Okay, so from their standpoint, they have to do it. But from maybe an outside perspective, why do we think it's better for them? Like, what are the outcomes the different outcomes that we're hoping for?
What we're hoping for is to embody community. That's the goal. I mean, to repair the harm to the community, but also be brought back into the community and made to feel safe to be vulnerable within the community and become a community. So the lure is. You're a happier person. You welcome people, look them in the eye in the morning, say good morning. It's community.
And maybe keeps them from getting into worse trouble.
Reoffending. Yeah. One of the things that restorative justice, no matter where you're looking at it, it's about harms and its needs, and it's about obligations. Those three kind of pieces. So, what harms were done, whose needs need to be met. So often in a restorative justice kind of activity of whatever, we ask the people who were directly impacted and were harmed, hey, this happened. What do you need in order to feel better and more and welcome back in this community? And so that happens a lot in restorative processes where the victim of the situation is able to directly get their needs met versus going through a court system and a traditional legal system, which sometimes takes a very long time to get those things met.
Right.
So that's one part. And I think what Mike was saying is very important. You know, humans are relational creatures, and belonging is a huge part about our human needs. So giving people the opportunity to talk about impact and then also try to make things right is really important, especially for young people, right? Like, so in the school part, you know, we say like, one of our mind shifts that we have to do to embrace restorative practices in schools is saying like, for young people, an incident is actually an opportunity for us to learn how to do things differently. And we learn by engaging people in this process. So we're like, not, hey, that's wrong, you have to go over there and sit, you know, forever and be expelled. It's, hey, we made a mistake, let's talk about who was harmed and why they were harmed. So, and then how do we make things right? So we often say, like, by the end of the process, not necessarily in the beginning of the process, but by the end of the process, the individuals who may have caused harm have understood and or have grown their knowledge about impact and need and being a part of the community and have, like, made more connections to hopefully, like you said, you know, develop capacity to be happier and maybe not make those same mistakes.
So like what Mark is saying, we're creating, if we can create an environment so that the person might start to get an inkling that, hey, I screwed up, but maybe this is going to help me a little bit. I mean, we had a fellow in here today that is withdrawn and a nice man. Something bad happened to him, and I just instinctively felt that this person has something to offer, you know, and he was easy to work with that way. And so I'm hoping that he might go home tonight and process and say, well, you know, I felt a little bit at ease despite my yanks from being there, because he was yanked to be here. It was not an easy thing. And but I think my goal, like what Mark was saying, is just get them to turn a negative into a positive. I mean, that's what we all. It's a charge for all of us, that we're challenged and things didn't go the way I planned them, blah, blah, blah. But hey, get up and, make a new plan.
Yeah.
And get them to believe in themselves.
Yeah.
It's a tall order.
Mm-hmm.
And not live in shame.
Right.
Yeah.
Shame just fosters... and not live in withdrawal. I mean, so we are dealing in a situation where people will back away and isolate. Mm-hmm. And as an older man, I know. You develop certain opinions, and if you're not careful, you believe your spin. We were talking about spin today.
Yeah.
Spins. Everybody's got a spin, but let's be the observer, not the criticizer. But
yeah. Yeah, I think that's important, the idea of shame, right? This idea that the idea with the restorative practice is to bring people back into a community to talk about that and integrate them back in, because the shame and exclusion is just a spiral down to probably more unhealthy activities. Yeah.
That's why we don't want to see people get incarcerated, because it can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, the shame thing is huge. I mean, it's a human condition to feel shame, but you don't want to rest your hat on shame. You'll be it's a spiral downhill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
positivity beats shame. You know, I mean, shame's just another emotion like jealousy, like, you know, anger.
So I don't want to beat my original question into the, but looking at the conventional approach, or the historically, what we've done most of our history, was the goal, was that, you know, what was the goal of that? So, was it shame, you know, shame, punishment? We say we want to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
And accountability, for a lot of people, just means punishment.
Yeah.
And maybe, and some shame, and you should pay.
Yeah.
Usually to everybody other than the victim or the offender.
Right.
So in that system, they don't really get a say in anything.
Yeah.
In the restorative justice system, the victim and the offender get a say in what has directly affected them.
And sometimes you can develop a relationship quickly. Another case we had today, the person that created the offense met the victim. I had them meet right after I did the intake the other day, and you know, the victim was, you know, there to make it. They found common ground. But I mean, in the past, yeah. I mean, I used to take people in front of the parole board, and some of them would sometimes shame the person. Yeah, you could see it. It was like a dagger.
Yeah, I think that's important about this idea of the victims and the community have more of a say in what it takes to make things right. And if we follow a traditional system where the questions are like, what law was broken, who is responsible, and what is the consequence, that takes all that power away from the victim and from the community to be able to say, hey, you know what, that, you know, like, this is what we need in order to kind of heal from this activity, this thing that happened, this is how we have. And I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that sometimes there needs to be some space and time between incident and repair. And I think that's important.
That's true, too.
You know,
Yeah.
like, especially in your reparative work, sometimes that offense happened several years ago, and it takes a while for them to get to that place.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to know. It's like, not everything is actually going to fall like this happened. Sometimes there needs to be some other interventions for safety's sake, right? We still have to acknowledge that.
Right. Oh, yeah.
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 And one
That's
of
right.
the things we talk about in schools a lot about this is the restorative process is hard. It's a hard process to go through. To be able to sit across a table or a circle with your community members and maybe the person that you harmed and talk about what happened is very hard.
It's like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
so true.
And so we say that there's this idea of active accountability, which is what we do in a restorative process, and passive accountability, which is like punishment handed down to you.
Yeah, it's totally different when you're in court. I've been to court a lot.
Yeah.
Totally different.
And when you walk in, and the passive accountability is, hey, this is what happened. Do you admit this? Yes or no? Okay, yes. Here is your fine, your punishment. You can leave the room. And an active accountability, if you go through a restorative process, there's also this part where you have to be there and talk about what led up to your situation, kind of what are the circumstances in your life that created this need, and then talk to the people about, like, hey, this happened. I'm admitting this happened. I had a role in it, and I want to repair it. And that's a hard thing to go through.
It sure is. And when I do an intake, when I intake everybody by myself, usually, and so it's essential at the intake for street reparative that you got to own, you know, that you did something. And so that's a hard, That's a hard sell. And I've been in plenty of intakes where I go, okay, I'm going to talk to my victim advocate, but I warn them that this intake may be, I may pass this back to the police because you're not taking responsibility for what you did.
Yep.
Mark, I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you, in schools, though, you talk about how hard it is for the offender,
Yeah.
right? Also imagine it's harder for all the, maybe the kids, but I'm thinking of the adults,
Mm-hmm.
the administration, the faculty, to sort of like move from what they've known to,
Yeah.
I think under, I mean, I was in education for a while.
Yeah.
and I tried to understand, I'm not sure the people around me, everyone was we were talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
I guess, so I'm wondering, one, how you deal with that,
Mhm.
but also if there's a school that you feel like is doing it really well, because I think everyone was always aspirational and never, you know, for a variety of reasons, not blaming anybody, but
Yeah.
it's hard to fully buy into it.
Fully buy in. Yeah, it's a hard shift to make, and I think that's important, right? So
Right.
we, 3 to 5 years is kind of like our expectation for a school to kind of shift from a traditional system to a restorative system, to fully buy in, to like put all the places, because we're talking mindset change, we're talking systems change,
Yeah,
we're
it's a lot.
talking support systems change. There's lots of stuff that goes into this. So it's a long process.
I think it's really admirable that you're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah,
actually,
thank
in
you.
School.
Yeah.
I think it's totally is.
Yeah. And so the way we go about that, which is, I'm glad you asked, is we have assessments where we start off and we talk about, and these assessments look at the components of a restorative school, like community building, like what are your systems in place, what's the support with leadership, what are the, you know, what's the community support look like? And we do that, we establish a team of individuals from that school to help us lead the process. So a restorative justice principle is those most impacted by this decision should have a say in those decisions. So we bring the school people in, so we don't come in and necessarily say, this is how it's gonna be done. We're like, these are the components of a restorative school. What are the parts and pieces that you feel like your school can adopt now? And then we work on it through that, and it's usually community building first, talk about that, and then work up to doing from community building circles to problem solving circles to maybe conflict circles and restorative conversations in different parts and pieces. And I think it's important, like I think your part is really important, right? We can't go from one system to another system. They can't leave in June to have their traditional system and then come back and everything's restorative. Like that won't necessarily work because your people and your building won't be like, yes, we believe this. It's a hard shift.
Could you look at that little progression again, though? The different kinds of circles,
Yeah, community building,
community building,
then problem solving,
problem solving, okay?
which is kind of like a lower level way of like, there's some disagreement,
There's the,
and like how do we do that? And then like a conflict circle or a welcome back kind of
Okay.
circle is like the higher level. And it falls under a multiple tier system of support kind of structure that schools use. So it's very familiar with your PBIS structure.
Right.
So it's got the same sort of idea. Yeah.
got some acronyms in there.
Yeah, yes, yes. Yes, we do. Yeah.
I didn't say they were good acronyms,
They were good.
4 strong letters.
4 strong letters, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, the PBIS is Positive Behavioral Intervention System. Is that right? Yeah,
I'm not sure what the
Sounds
acronyms
good,
yeah,
good.
yeah, sounds good. Yeah, it's cool. Other questions?
Could you talk some, Michael, about how the people that we see on the panel might fulfill their accountability?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
you know, people say restorative justice is a slap on the wrist. They
Right,
know
right.
it's not punishment, but what is it instead of that is the hard work for people we see?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to ask them sometimes to write a letter of reflection, and that can be very difficult. And just to get people to write, it can be very difficult, but we work at that to try to get them confident enough so that they will write down, the reflections. So that's one thing, and of course they have to write apology letters a lot of times, and we have an instruction sheet on how to do that, and we'll talk them through that, and then we, if it's appropriate, community service, which I've often wanted to have like a community service crew that I could put with slots that I could put people into, because that's not easy to get some folks to do. So community service is another, and sometimes a verbal apology, like Mark was saying, just having direct contact with the victim, saying they're sorry, and asking the victim what do they need to repair the damage that they may have done. That's doesn't happen that often. I wish it did, but that's a very powerful tool. So
Why doesn't it happen more often?
well, I do think that victims sometimes don't want to bring it back up because even if it hasn't passed that much time, they have a difficulty facing their
Understood.
There's a safety
Sure.
issue,
Depends on the
and it's a cultural thing too. Like Mark was saying, it takes 3 to 5 years. I don't know what's. I do know that nights like tonight, we talk about restorative justice. It's a good thing. It's an education. I believe in it personally, and it takes time. But I don't know if I answered your question, Carlotta. But
Yeah, I think it does take time, and I think we, as has already been said, we're somewhat limited that, we see a person maybe twice, a month apart for an hour, and that's short compared to, say, like in a big city where there's a lot of funding, you could meet with that person for quite a while before and work separately with the person that was harmed, and then bring them together, and it's much more transformational than what we have the ability to do.
I mean, I'm not under a requirement. I mean, like this one fellow today, I said, hey, I don't feel great about cutting you loose after your second meeting, But, so, I mean, we could do more of that.
We have the flexibility to do that, but it limits how many people we can see because it's once a month.
Yeah,
and
no,
limits
I
how
feel
deep
that too.
we can go because it's an hour, and some of the people we see, we end up networking on their behalf, like, okay, this is a good counselor, this is where you go to the food pantry, you can go to the library to print out your resume, here's a website that's designed for people that are trying to get back in the job market, here's a substance abuse place to go to. But the time is limited, and that's what we've got, and it's definitely better than nothing. But especially if the person didn't come of their full accord.
Oh, sure. Well, that happens too.
That's tough too.
And I also, if I take the time, I do call after they're done and check up on them, if I sense that we got a relationship somehow.
Yeah, that piece, we don't get to see that, but
No.
attentiveness that you put before and after,
Yeah,
is an important piece of it.
it definitely is. And to get more and more people open-minded enough to accept community service people is another kind of a goal that I haven't really come to fruition yet. But people would sacrifice a little performance to help a needy person would be nice, and some do. And that's, because, I mean, to get involved in the community is very important.
If we could fast forward into the future after the children that Mark is working with now, and they're all living in a community together and they understand that they have recourse, if they took this person in that had done something really harmful and gave them a chance and it didn't work out, that they could go to a circle and sit with them and say, I trusted you, what happened? Let's talk about this, and
Oh, yeah.
and have witnesses that are not judging them. It's very different. I feel like, when you go into the court, like it's already been said, the person that did the harm, they have every reason to minimize the harm they did in the court system. They don't want to get slammed with a big charge. So they have every reason to lie and be defensive and make up a story about it really wasn't me, the other guy started it. And here it's like, this is where the rubber meets the road, because they come to us because they have been identified as a person that did harm. And this is where you don't get to like blame the system, because you're getting punished and like that wasn't fair, and you can still have that attitude in the prison system. But coming here, you can't play that. Like, you goofed up, it's a human thing, and there's something you can do to take that off your conscience and live freely and be accepted, be integrated back in.
I mean, that's where court, has, and they see a lot of people, and like Mark was saying, they're based on, you broke the law, and these are the consequences of that you could or could not be placed upon you. So it backs them into the situation.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah.
And Carlotta, I really appreciate what you said, because I think what you were just talking about right now is why restorative justice works. Is community members like yourself are able to come into a room and into a space with somebody and have that dialogue with them and find out, what are those underlying causes?
Yeah.
And here are the ways that we know that maybe this can help. And in a process where you get to see somebody once or twice or 3 times, there's also this opportunity to follow up on those things.
Yeah.
And you start building a relationship, and it's shifting the community from a bunch of strangers to people that they now know. Whether they acknowledge you out in the community, that's up to them. It's up to them.
Right.
But they also say, "Oh, I know these people, and they were there for me when I made a mistake, and they came in and they accepted me." And that's the powerful thing about restorative
Right,
justice
it
is
is.
the community just showing up, and that's why it's volunteers, right?
Yeah.
Mike and I have paid roles, but the volunteers are what make restorative justice work.
That's right. Yeah.
Because you're showing up of your own time and your own interest and your own commitment to this community and saying, we want to help wherever we can. So
And,
you're the backbone.
What better way, to help your community than to help people that have made a mistake,
Yeah. And when you see somebody one month and they come back the other month and you can see the change.
Oh, yeah.
You can see the change in their body language and how they're speaking. It's just like,
Yeah, it's pretty satisfying.
oh,
Yeah,
that works.
yeah, yeah. It can be gratifying.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also why we say by the end of the process, not in the
Right.
beginning, but that part by the end. So change takes time.
Yeah.
And even small changes take time, but by the end of the process.
Yeah, change is hard for all of us.
Yeah.
And they need to hear that too. I mean, that you may have suffered from the same affliction.
Yeah.
And so restorative-wise, people can tell stories, volunteers can tell stories, so that they can seek that common ground. That you can't expect people to tell you the truth if they're not feeling commonality. Yeah.
Any other?
I know that, I think, I'm not sure if this is dated information, but that our elementary school had made a go of it for a while, a few
Mhm.
years ago, under the previous principal.
Mhm.
Not sure where it is now. Wondering, like, you say you work in schools, I mean, you working with all ages? Or is there what's your opinion about when the best
Yeah.
phase of their development to try and make this happen?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Right now, we're currently working with primarily, in this district, primarily elementary schools, but in other districts, we work with high schools, elementary schools and high schools. There is an amazing kind of connection between restorative justice and elementary schools, just by the way they approach their teaching and their environment, which makes it really kind of easy to interface these things. And I realize, and now you ask that question, what school is doing this well? I forgot to answer that part. And Wolcott Elementary here is doing an amazing job of bringing restorative principles throughout their school. It's a small school, but they are still also, they are doing all sorts of things about establishing community, teaching kids how to run circles, teaching kids about restorative processes, teaching kids to have conversations about harm. So they're doing it all, and it's amazing. And they are kind of our star school out of this district, and now we're working in the other elementary schools to kind of build that same sort of model with the same process. So yeah, elementary schools are a great place. I was having conversations with the elementary school principals the other day, and they were like, well, if we start here, then these students, when they learn this, I think as Carlotta was saying, they go up through the ages, and then they bring it to the middle school with them, and then we help reinforce the middle school. So it takes a little while, but we can see that shift. People saying like, oh, something happened, let's circle up, or let's have a conversation and figure out how to repair this.
How about at the middle school or high school level?
What about it?
'Cause, like, schools that may have been doing, not comparable to what Wolcott's done at the
Yeah.
elementary level, but, because that's where my experience was, and that's where it was hard.
It's hard, yeah.
And I don't think they ever had a multi-year understanding of that's what it would take, or and implement a sort of staged implementation.
Yeah.
It was like, we're doing this, and then we're just gonna keep, and we don't do it right the first time, we're just gonna keep at it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about understanding the mindset of why you're doing it, right? So if you're looking for restorative justice just to be a system that you implement into your current system so that you can make kids behave, it's not going to work, right? So
That's an interesting point.
that is not the idea of restorative justice. So the idea of restorative justice is building a community which holds the kids and the community together. So when harm is done, so restorative justice first is a damaging of relationships. So if we understand that, our community has to be strong enough to say, we have this damage in our relationship and we want to fix it. And we want to keep people included in that. And so that's really one of those things. So you have to think about what you're doing in a way that is aligned with a restorative mindset and not a traditional punitive mindset, and use this as another tool to, do something that you want to be punitive.
So if you're kind of short-shrifting the community building part,
Yeah.
you're undermining your, I think that's part of what was going on in some of my schools.
Yeah, I think it's important because there's an interview that I often refer back to about a school in New York City, a high school that uses this, and one of the restorative practitioners there says, you can't restore back to something that doesn't exist, right? So if there's no community to restore back to, what is the incentive for this student to buy into a restorative process? So really thinking about that part of that interaction. You know, if we
That's
want
really
to, if we want to restore back to something, there has to be something there to start.
That's a simple but profound
It is.
way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And community is teaching people. Community is, you know, that's great if it can start in the elementary school, fertile ground, you know, because community is, you know, we have to, as I think one of the things we're charged with is, you know, instilling that wherever we can. You know, help people in your community. You know, it's, you live with them, you know, and we're a collective. And it's so important in this day and age with electronics that helps us to isolate, you know, and I think we're seeing it, you know, people, and that's why you can't beat this, you know.
One of the things that I think about, which is really amazing about Hardwick, is, you know, if we can take the other big, the Civic and all the work that they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
About building community, it's actually creating this really fertile ground for restorative justice to really take hold in more ways than just what's happening with Michael in your program.
Yeah,
So there's
sure.
an opportunity that we're building community throughout Hardwick, right? There's arts things that are happening,
Civic
there's
Standards
meals that
done-
are happening,
I mean,
there's all this community that's
They've
happening.
done a great job.
Yeah.
There's a fine example of people that embody community and are willing to take some risk.
Yeah. So when I think about restorative justice and restorative practices and like moving it from the criminal legal system into the community, into the schools, it's all these pieces that are really important. You know, all the different ways people can connect and build
Yeah.
and like make relationships. So it's pretty cool.
I don't think you're going to run out of work anytime too soon.
No. No, definitely not. It's cool.
Yeah.
And until those kids grow up, we're not gonna run out of work either.
That's true. And there will be always opportunities, right? Like,
Yeah.
people make mistakes all the time.
Right. Well, that's what we do.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we stumble.
You stumble.
But foster a community without shame and blame, and you know, you admit it and dust yourself off and do it again. I mean, not do it again. Sorry, but you know, live your life. Live your life, baby.
Yeah. Cool.
And I think that's great. You're doing it in the schools, Mark. I really do.
Yeah.
So is there the circles of accountability, no, circles of support and accountability? Are those, I know those are part of what the St. Johnsbury Restorative Center does with offenders looking, you know, interacting with the court system.
Yeah, they've been incarcerated for, typically COSA happens to people that have done a fair amount of time.
Is that just a name we give to them, or is that like I'm wondering if is there an analogy to that in school approach? Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just asking you to tell me a little more about that.
What that would look like.
That sounds pretty important. Got circles, got support, got accountability.
Yeah, right? And it's, you know, it's an ongoing process working with one person. So one of the things that I think that the parallel would be is, you know, you have one student who may have been asked to leave the community or maybe struggling a lot, and then they have a team that meets with them on a regular basis on some goals. And so it may not be called a COSA in a school, but that's the same sort of idea. They have this group of adults and maybe family members who come together and say, hey, these are the things that we look to have happen. You know, we want to reintegrate you, and here are our goals. How are we doing on those? And we come back and we check on those, and we come back and we check on those. And that's one of the things that I think is important that often gets forgotten when we talk about restorative justice is it's the coming back. We make an agreement, but we have to come back and check on those.
Yeah.
We kind of have to follow up until in a COSA model that piece happens.
So I'm imagining some specific kids.
Okay.
And because the one-time sort of let's get together, let's decide what the harms were and what the needs are and
Yeah.
how do we restore it.
Mm-hmm.
It's for a person that has sort of made a bad choice, wasn't thinking,
Yeah.
And then you got the kids, when you talk about the coast, you got the kids who are just like, don't quite have as much choice over their own behavior. There's a certain, they've found out a lot of issues going on, so they're like, they're working on it, but they fall off the
Yeah.
wagon more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
I think also might be hard for it.
So, but is that what it's aimed for, the person who you know they're gonna, because if you're a victim and you're like, okay, I believe you're sincere, but I also know, based on experience, that this is probably gonna happen again.
Yeah.
Maybe not to me, but to somebody else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that person's gonna learn something, but not all of it.
And it might not happen, like, again, it might not happen in that one process, but if you come back and you use like skillful questioning, that restorative justice, like, oh, so what, this happened, tell me what happened before that. And you start talking about the precursors to your behavior. So if you have this relationship with an individual in this kind of ongoing conversation, you can start helping them identify the things that happened beforehand and help them understand kind of what conditions and causes exist in their life before they make decisions that maybe harm other people.
Like
And
you
it's-
said,
and it
like you
can-
said, you can't have that conversation unless you have like a pretty good relationship.
We gotta have a good relationship. And like what you said in your scenario, and if the person admits like, I gotta do something differently or I'm working on it, then that's fertile ground. That's like,
Right.
and of course then the opposite of pulling someone in and having those conversations is it excluding them, pushing them out, and then they actually don't learn anything except for there's another community that doesn't want me.
Right.
So that's kind of the why that pulling them in is important. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question, though. It's a very
It
good
is.
question. Like, how do you unfold that COSA model in a school? Yeah. Cool.
Well, I've talked with Mike a little bit about, how we as a community might understand this a little better, and I thank Diane for
Yeah.
pulling this together.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm still struggling a bit when I'm out here, I think a lot of people would be, but I think even just the spirit of it is important.
Yeah.
And even if
It
you're a
is.
parent, you know what's happening in your school, you don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah,
So I just feel like it would be something that we should keep talking about.
definitely.
There's the aspiration is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is too. And I think it's definitely a great evolution in education to be teaching restorative justice to young people. I just think it's super important.
As a former math teacher, I might argue that it's more important than algebra 2.
I think it might, I don't know, you gotta,
There are
you know,
pieces that are.
Maybe algebra 1, but
But maybe algebra too.
but it's a great thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important. Like in a restorative justice world, we do need to have conversations with people, and all sorts of people, right? Even people who don't agree with our position around
Right.
restorative justice. And having those conversations is what's important, right? Yeah, yeah.
And I think we have it, in my mind as an older man, I think there's been a history of, hey, tough it out, That's never worked. I mean, you need to discuss what's bothering you. You have, in order to evolve, you have to take a good look.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though about parents, we can talk about woke it, parents who like, someone listened to my kid,
Yeah.
where do they, is there a restorative thing that has to happen with them, or do they at least have to understand it enough to
Yeah.
trust that it's working out?
Yes, both. They
That's
kind
gonna
of
be
have to
hard.
understand what the process is, and the administration there is very good at talking to families about what's going on, how are they approaching things, kind of what their goals are, and bringing them in to be part of that conversation too, when
I
it
think
makes
that would be
sense.
very important.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess I have another little scenario, and then I swear I'm done. But I happen to serve on the Hardwick Equity Committee,
Nice.
and we've heard some anecdotal stories. 1.5 hand, like not first hand, but someone who was pretty close to the situation.
Okay.
So this isn't just rumor. But you had issues where, slurs were launched and the offending students were hauled in, but the administration wasn't so skilled or experienced or well oriented to dealing with it. And the offended, the victim, the receiver of these slurs didn't feel, their needs weren't met. They didn't feel like anyone understood, was doing anything, it was like trying to go through some emotion anyway. So I guess I'm wondering, I don't know what the community's status is, but I was wondering, like, in that situation, I mean, is there anything that restorative justice can inform to that situation, even if they haven't done years and years or months of community building and practice circles?
Yeah. First, I think there's lots of things to consider there, right? There's lots of things. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is restorative justice needs to take into the account the needs of the victim, right? So that conversation should happen first. It's like acknowledging that harm's been done and connecting with them and what do they need to feel safe. And that should be like priority, like one in a restorative model, is to have that conversation. I think there's opportunities. I think you have to tread carefully in those things, because sometimes if it's not done in a way that it promotes safety of that, then if it's a bullying like situation, if there's harm being done, it can be.
It didn't sound like a rattle, I don't know. But what you said is, again, simple but profound, because I think the focus of the process, how much of a process there was what do we do with this kid? What's the thing to do with the offender?
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a meeting, but it didn't sound like it. It didn't sound like the outcome of that was like, we enumerated our needs. We were like, let's talk about it and then we'll do something with this kid. So I might follow up based on what you just
There's
said.
some really good teaching tolerance and some other places that have really good outlines for schools' response to hate speech, which is really good. And there's like interrupting the first part, like educating the second part. There's all these things that should happen in these kind of situations. And there's outlines that are out there that are really
that, and I haven't referred to it in a while. So
you reach out. I have it.
It would be.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's really important. And then in a sort of justice model, it's centering that victim and what do they need.
Okay, I yield the remainder of my time. Which is none.
Which is none. Any other?
Okay.
Are we moved on to closing arguments? We're not there. So I did bring some stuff that I find is helpful, and we can share this. One is one of our like little restorative problem-solving posters, which I think is kind of fun. It really breaks down the restorative process really simply to like defining the situation, explore the impact, repair the harm, reach an agreement, and then ask yourself, did we do these things? Did we make amends? Did we explore? Do we develop strategies to not have things happen? So this is for anyone who would like to borrow that. I brought some restorative justice cards. Do you have these?
I don't.
No. So these are developed by IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices, and they're double-sided cards. One is to respond to challenging behavior. So it's the questions you ask to respond to challenging behavior. The other one is to help those who have been harmed. So depending on who is in the situation, you ask these different questions to. And they're all based, so let's pass those around. Yeah. So those are probably the big ones that I think have the most.
Well, you should just pass these out at the beginning.
We'd be done.
Just, I got the card.
You got the card, that's all you need.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good.
The print is a little small, so. Yeah. Cool.
Speaking of acronyms, so that's a funny acronym, ERP.
That urban IIRP, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Nice.
Yeah, very good.
I like that. What do you think you need to do to make things right? Instead of like, how about if you do this? How about if you do that?
Yes.
It's like start with what comes out of them is what would heal their conscience. They know how to get that load off their
Yeah.
conscience.
And Carla, that's a huge part, right? What do you think needs, yes. So again, if we're thinking in passive accountability versus active accountability, that's the active accountability piece.
Yeah.
What do you think? Not what am I gonna tell you?
Yeah.
Because that might actually not be the right thing for both sides, even for victims. It's
Yeah.
what do you think? And that's the hard part, and that's why in schools, we see this as like a place to teach kids, because a lot of times they're like, I don't know, tell me what to do. And you're like,
Right.
well, let's figure this out together. And it's an opportunity to really think about, if harm has happened, what is the way to repair that harm? And that's a skill. It's a skill that we don't work on a lot, so
Yeah.
it's very cool. All right.
Good.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.